My mother looked me in the eyes and said, with that voice she saved just for cutting me down, "That girl is never going to finish a degree. She'll spend her life mopping floors just like me." And she laughed. My sister laughed with her. 15 people around the table heard it. I was 22 years old, a cleaning uniform stuffed in my bag, and an anatomy notebook hidden underneath it. That day I didn't say a word. 5 years later, a doctor shouted down the hallway of Atlanta Medical Center, "Doctor, we need you right now." And my mother was standing right in front of me. She watched me run past in my white coat, and the laugh she kept saved up for me died in her throat before it could leave. I didn't stop to look at her in that moment. There was a child who needed me, but I know she saw, and I know that was the second when all those years passed through her eyes in a different way, a way she can never take back. I'm not telling you this to talk about revenge. I'm telling you because that dinner, that humiliation said out loud, in front of 15 people, with my own family laughing, was the night I understood that sometimes the people who should support you are the first ones who need to see you fail so they can feel whole, and that the only way to survive that is to decide, clearly and coldly, that their failure is not going to be yours. If you've ever heard from someone in your own family that you weren't going anywhere, that you were dreaming too big, that people like you don't make it, tell me in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Leave a like and subscribe, because this story was made for you. Let me tell you how it all started, and I need to take you back to exactly where it began, because it wasn't at the hospital, it wasn't in medical school. It started in a small kitchen in the Mechanicsville neighborhood of Atlanta on a Wednesday afternoon when I was 14 years old and found a biology textbook sitting on top of the recycling bin at the end of our street. I grew up in Mechanicsville, one of those neighborhoods on the southwest side of Atlanta that everyone in the city knows what it means, even if nobody says it out loud. The house had 2 bedrooms when I was little, added on to little by little through my mother's effort. Her name was Donna Brooks. She cleaned houses for a living from the time she was 16. My father left when I was 7. My sister Keisha, 2 years older, was the favorite from the beginning. Not through any declared cruelty, but through that quiet preference children feel before they have words to name it. My mother was a woman who worked her whole life. I'll say that clearly. She was up at 5 in the morning and home at 8 at night with rough hands and swollen feet. She never asked anyone for anything, and that was exactly what destroyed her from the inside in a way she never realized. She had internalized the idea that this was what existed for her, and when I started wanting something different, when I started dreaming about a life she'd never dreamed for herself, she didn't know what to do with that. So she did what she knew how to do. She tried to protect me from failure by convincing me failure was certain. Medical school? She said that with a face I can't forget. It wasn't anger. It was something more complicated. It was fear mixed with something I spent years understanding. Jealousy? Not exactly. It was more like pain. The pain of someone who sees a door that never existed for them and doesn't know whether to push you through it or pull you back. And she pulled me back, repeatedly. With words. Medical school is for people who have money. You'll drop out halfway through and will have wasted everything. Your cousin Tamara tried college and quit second year. It's always the same. Do you know how many years that is? You'll be 30 with no work experience. Keisha heard it and repeated it. She'd married young, at 19, to a man who had his own car and worked at a distribution company. And for my family, that was what success looked like. Stability, solid ground. And every time I showed up with a dream, Keisha reminded me that the solid ground was right there, accessible, no risk involved. Stop fantasizing, Nat. Get a certificate, do nursing, get yourself a job. My Aunt Gloria, my mother's sister, had a different theory about me that she didn't keep to herself. I was uppity. I was trying to act like I was better than the family. "This girl has ideas," she'd tell my mother right in front of me, like I wasn't there. "You let her get away with too much." Those 3 voices, my mother, my sister, my aunt, formed a chorus. And a chorus wears you down. A chorus gets inside your head even when you know, rationally, that it's wrong. There were nights I'd lie down and those voices would run on a loop and I'd have to work hard just to find my own voice underneath them. But I found it. I always found it. And that was what saved me. The biology textbook I found on top of the recycling bin when I was 14 was a Campbell and Reese high school edition, with a scratched cover and some pages dog-eared. Someone had thrown it out. I took it home and read it cover to cover in 2 weeks. There was a chapter on the nervous system that I read 3 times. I didn't understand every word, but something inside me understood it. Understood that there was a whole world of explanations behind every single thing that happens in a human body, and that world had a name and a method, and I wanted to get inside it. I kept that book for years. When I started community college prep, it was in my bag. When I got my MCAT score, it was on my shelf. When I moved into the apartment that is mine today, it was one of the first things I packed. It's still here, scratched cover, dog-eared pages, and a note I wrote in red ink in the margin of the nervous system chapter when I was 14. One day I'm going to understand this for real. I needed a job to support myself through school. I applied to Morehouse School of Medicine in the fall of my senior year. A senior year I'd financed with weekend gigs, cleaning a hair salon on Memorial Drive every Saturday morning for $200 cash. When the acceptance letter came, admitted to the MD program, merit scholarship covering 60% of tuition, I cried in the salon bathroom alone, phone in my hand, smelling like cleaning product. I didn't tell my mother that day. I held on to the news until it felt real. When I finally told her, she went quiet for about 10 seconds. Then she said, "Who's going to pay for the rest?" It was a fair question, but in that moment I needed something else, and she didn't have that other thing to give. The answer to her question was, me. I was going to pay. With a job I found posted on the Morehouse Student Bulletin Board. Overnight housekeeping staff at Atlanta Medical Center on West Peachtree Street. 8 hours a night, Monday through Friday, $14.50 an hour with health insurance and a transit card. Started at 10 p.m., ended at 6 a.m. First-year classes started at 8. I slept 4 hours a night for 2 years. My job was to clean the hallways in the adult inpatient unit and, on slower nights, the emergency department waiting areas. I wore a sea green uniform with the hospital logo embroidered on the left chest pocket. I pushed the housekeeping cart down the same hallway where, a few years later, I would run in a white coat to respond to a pediatric emergency. I mopped that floor. I scrubbed that floor. I knew every crack in that gray terrazzo. The first signs that it would be harder emotionally than physically came early. In my second month, a nurse told me not to use the restroom in the clinical hallway. That one's for healthcare staff only. She said it with a politeness that was worse than rudeness, because she genuinely hadn't thought it might sting. It was natural to her. It was just how that space was ordered, and she'd grown up inside that order without questioning it. There was a dietary aide who called me honey even though I was 20 and she was maybe 33. "Honey, run the mop through here first. Honey, the family lounge needs attention." No bad intentions. Just automatic. The way the world was arranged in that building. And she'd never questioned the arrangement. And there was the issue of the notebook. During breaks, 30 minutes at 2 in the morning, I'd sit on a bench in the back hallway near the supply room and study. I kept the Gray's Anatomy tucked inside my bag. I read under the yellow fluorescent light with monitor sounds humming in the background. One night, a resident walked past and saw me, looked at the book, looked at me, looked at the sea green uniform, walked away without saying anything, but with an expression I learned to recognize, genuine confusion. The image didn't process. Anatomy textbook plus housekeeping uniform didn't compute for him. That's how it was for 2 years. And I let it go because I needed the money, because I knew it was temporary, because I had a plan that was bigger than any humiliation in those hallways. But the dinner at Dr. Harold Whitfield's home was something else entirely. It happened at the end of June in my 3rd year of medical school. It was a Friday. I had the night off. A night off I rarely used to go out, but my mother had insisted. Aunt Gloria was celebrating her anniversary, and Dr. Whitfield, a respected cardiologist in Atlanta, was an old friend of my uncle's. "It'll look good if you show up," my mother said. "The family hasn't been together in a while." Dr. Whitfield's house was in Buckhead, that part of Atlanta where the houses have high gates, circular driveways, and landscaping done by someone who gets paid for it. I drove up from Mechanicsville in a car I'd bought for $1,800 that sometimes started on the second try. I wore a dark green dress I'd found at a Goodwill on Moreland Avenue for $12. It was clean, ironed, presentable. There were 15 people at the table when it happened. Dr. Whitfield's wife, Dr. Patricia Calloway Whitfield, a cardiologist herself, had made a long dinner, 3 courses, real silver on the table, crystal glasses. The kind of setting where you're not completely sure which fork goes with what. Aunt Gloria was beautiful in a new dress she'd bought specifically for the occasion. Keisha's husband had on a blazer. My mother had gotten her hair done. It was when Dr. Whitfield asked, with that sociable curiosity of a man who genuinely tries to include everyone, "And your girls, Donna? What are they up to these days?" My mother smiled. She talked about Keisha first. Married, 2 kids, hard-working husband, house almost paid off. The pride was real, and I understood it. Then she turned to me, and the smile shifted. Got a little edge in it that wasn't quite pride. That smile of someone who's about to say something hard with a lot of lightness, as though the weight doesn't exist. "Natalie works at the medical center," she said, and paused, and added, "in housekeeping. Poor thing, she tried to get into school, but..." She shook her head with that expression of "what can you do?" "Maybe she can do a medical assistant program later, something smaller, more realistic." I heard that and felt 15 people at the table turn toward me in slow motion. I was in my 3rd year of medical school at Morehouse. I had passed the MCAT. I had completed 13 courses. My mother knew all of this. She knew everything. And right there, at that table, in front of 15 people she wanted to impress, she erased it all as though it had never existed. Aunt Gloria sighed with a sympathy that was worse than indifference. "Bless her heart," and added, in that tone of someone offering life wisdom, "It's not for everybody, really. Medicine is a lot." Keisha nodded, said nothing, just nodded, with that expression of someone agreeing with a settled fact. Dr. Whitfield, being polite, tried to soften it. "Well, anyone working in healthcare is contributing, regardless." My mother nodded along with conviction. "Exactly. Natalie is hard-working. She'll find her way." I wondered if she realized what she was doing, whether it was conscious. I concluded in that second that it wasn't, that it had come out so naturally because that was genuinely what she believed. And somehow that was harder to swallow than if it had been calculated cruelty. And then my mother who had seen me study past midnight, who had found my white coat in the laundry, who had seen my Morehouse student ID in the kitchen drawer, completed the thought, with the ease of someone stating a fact they fully believe. "That girl is never going to finish a degree. She'll spend her life mopping floors just like me," and laughed. The laugh came light and unguarded, like a fact of nature, like saying it's going to rain because the sky is cloudy. I felt the blood leave my face, felt my heart hit one beat too hard, felt the urge to push back from the table and leave, and I sat still. Dr. Patricia Calloway Whitfield, at the head of the table, stopped with her fork in the air. She looked at me, and I saw in her face, that serious face of a woman in her 50s who had built her career in a field where women had to fight twice as hard, an expression that wasn't pity. It was something heavier than pity. It was recognition. The expression of someone who knows that specific moment when someone erases you in front of an audience and knows that anything she says right now will make it worse, not better. The dinner continued. The conversation moved on. I ate without tasting anything. I drove home at 10 that night, went straight to my shift, cleaned the hallway in the inpatient unit, sat on the bench near the supply room at the 2 a.m. break, opened my clinical skills notebook, and decided, with that clarity that only comes when anger mixes with exhaustion and produces something colder and more deliberate, that I was never going to walk into a room where my mother could erase me again. She could only erase me if I kept making myself small enough to fit inside the image she had of me. And I had stopped doing that the day I got my acceptance letter. I just hadn't made it clear to her yet. But life makes it clear on its own when you stop being afraid. In the days after the dinner, I started seeing how the pattern that exploded at that table had been built over years. Every member of my family had a role, different but complementary. Together they formed a system with a function. Keep me inside a limit that was their limit, not mine. I talked about it with Cheryl on a night shift in July. She was my co-worker, 43 years old, 2 kids she raised by herself, in housekeeping at Atlanta Medical for 11 years, with the kind of practical wisdom no degree teaches. She was the only person on the night shift who knew I was a medical student. I'd told her in a weak moment, one night when I was so exhausted I couldn't keep pretending the anatomy book was casual reading. That night in July, 2 days after the dinner at Dr. Whitfield's, I was mopping the same section of hallway I'd been mopping for 7 minutes without realizing it. Cheryl noticed. "What's going on?" "Nothing." She looked at me, kept scrubbing. "Nat, you've been on the same spot for 7 minutes. I stopped, looked at the hallway. She was right. I told her what had happened at the dinner, every word of it. Cheryl listened all the way through without interrupting. "Your mama is scared," she said, mopping with that precision of someone who's done it for a long time. "It's not meanness, it's fear." "Scared of what?" "She should be proud." Cheryl paused, looked at me sideways. "Proud because you're going to have a life she never had? Nat, that's more complicated than it sounds. When you make it, she's going to have to look at her own life differently. And that hurts when you haven't gotten ready for that kind of hurt. But I never asked her to sacrifice anything." "You didn't ask, but she sacrificed." Cheryl stopped her mop, looked at the wall for a second before going on, and now her logic says if you made it with sacrifice, she should have made it too, and she didn't. So the whole logic has to be wrong. It's easier to say you won't make it than to face that math. Are you telling me she does this because she loves me? I'm telling you she does it because she's scared and she doesn't know how to name the fear. Love and fear come out the same hole sometimes. She went back to mopping. That doesn't make what she does right. It makes it explainable. Those are different things. So what do I do with that? You keep going. She looked at me. That's the only way to prove, to her, to you, to everybody at that table, that her fear was wrong. I stayed quiet a moment, then said, "Cheryl, why are you telling me this?" She stopped again, stood with her back to me for a second, looking at the empty hallway ahead, "Because I wish someone had told me earlier. When I gave up on going back to school, it was because my mother-in-law kept telling me it was impossible, that I had kids, that I had responsibilities, that I wouldn't be able to handle it." She breathed. "I let her win. You didn't let anybody win. Don't waste what you're building here." She said that and went back to work. And I stood there watching her mop that hallway and understood in that 2 a.m. moment that sometimes the wisest person in the room is wearing a sea green uniform holding a mop. That intelligence doesn't live where the world decides to put it. That conversation stayed with me. It came with me through the semesters that followed, through the late-night study sessions, through the shelf exams, through the 36-hour call shifts, when doubt came, and it came, in the middle of the night when exhaustion dropped the guard. I remembered Cheryl saying, "You didn't let anybody win," with that voice of someone who knows exactly the weight of what they're saying. The second and third years were the hardest. Not because of the content. I loved the content. That was the part that fed me. It was the logistics of living in two worlds at the same time that wore me down in a way that's hard to describe. I'd leave the shift at 6 a.m., shower, sleep 2 hours, go to class from 8 to noon, go to the library, eat something, go back to class, go home, sleep 90 minutes, study, eat, and drive back to the hospital for 10 p.m. I did that for 2 full years. There was a week in second year, 2 shelf exams on the same day, anatomy and biochemistry, when I didn't sleep more than 3 hours in 5 days. On the 5th day, I was cleaning the emergency waiting area at 4 in the morning and started reading an informational poster on the wall without meaning to. I read it 3 times, not because it was interesting, because my brain was so depleted it couldn't tell relevant information from background noise. I passed both exams. I didn't mention it to anyone, not to make myself a martyr, so I didn't give anyone the satisfaction of saying, "I told you it was too much." I kept my struggles in the same place I kept my victories, inside, where nobody could use either as an argument. In third year, a research fellowship, secured by my faculty advisor Dr. Yolanda Freeman, who had noticed me in a small group session because of a question I asked and quietly kept watching from there, let me cut my housekeeping shifts from 5 nights to 3, $200 less per week. But I slept 5 hours a night instead of 4, and that changed everything. I kept working. I kept studying. In 4th year, I found pediatrics, kids in vulnerable situations, premature babies in the neonatal ICU, families that came from the same places I came from, and something locked into place inside me with a precision I'd never felt before. That was it. That was exactly what I had gone through all of this to get to. It was at the end of 4th year that Dr. Patricia Calloway Whitfield came looking for me. I was in the hallway of Atlanta Medical, in a white coat this time, as a 4th year on clinical rotation, when she stopped in front of me, I took 2 seconds to recognize her out of context. She recognized me immediately. "You're Donna's daughter," she said. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at me for a moment with those eyes that seemed to be evaluating and caring at the same time. "You were studying anatomy in that back hallway, weren't you? During your breaks from the cleaning shift." I felt my stomach tighten. "Yes, I walked past you 3 times," she said. "Told my colleagues. Nobody believed me." She paused. "That night at the dinner, when your mother said what she said," she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "I almost spoke up," she said, "but I understood it wasn't my place, and that it would have made things worse, not better, in that moment." She held out a card. "I run a community health program that serves children in underserved Atlanta neighborhoods. We're looking for residents with a strong clinical profile in pediatrics. If you're interested in talking about residency, call me." I looked at the card, looked at her, said, "I'm interested." She smiled. Small, contained. "I thought you might be." "How did you know?" "Because anyone who studies anatomy at 2 in the morning in a hospital hallway knows what they want." She was already walking when she said it. "Call me this week." What Dr. Calloway Whitfield didn't tell me in that hallway, what I learned weeks later, once we'd started working together and gotten to know each other, was that she had held on to that dinner with a vividness that surprised me. She'd seen me pushing the housekeeping cart through the medical center for months. She'd noticed the notebook. She'd carried around that incomplete puzzle, the image of a housekeeper studying anatomy at 2 in the morning, without being able to put the pieces together. And when the pieces came together, when she connected the housekeeper in the back hallway to the daughter who'd been erased at the dinner table with a laugh, she got angry. In that quiet, precise way that women who have gone far tend to get angry when they recognize in someone else the pattern they themselves survived. "I did my residency at a time when women were a minority in cardiology," she told me one afternoon over coffee in her office. "I know what it is to have someone erase you before you've even arrived. You went through that too? Every woman who got where I am went through it." She set her mug down with a finality that settled the question. "The difference is what you do with it. Some people forget so they can survive. Some people keep it so they can act when the moment comes. You kept it. I kept it. And you showed up." She looked at me. "I'm not asking you to thank me for this. I'm asking you to do the same for someone when your moment comes." I thought about Cheryl. "I already know who that's going to be." She smiled again. The same small, contained smile. "Then we're good." That conversation in her office stayed with me differently than the others, because Dr. Calloway Whitfield hadn't helped me out of pity. She'd helped me because she recognized in me something she knew. And there's an enormous difference between those two things. Pity keeps you small. Recognition finds you where you're already big. Meanwhile, Keisha's life, that stable life with solid ground that my family had held up as the model, was quietly coming apart in a way nobody wanted to look at. I found out in pieces. First, from Aunt Gloria, who called on a Sunday to just catch up and let slip that Marcus, Keisha's husband, had been laid off from the distribution company. Then from my mother, who mentioned in passing that they were behind on the mortgage. And then, on a Wednesday night, Keisha called me directly. I hadn't spoken to her in 6 months, not out of any declared conflict, out of exhaustion. Every conversation with her or my mother had that heavy texture of having to justify myself, having to prove that I existed in a legitimate way. I had stopped putting myself through it while I finished school. When Keisha's name appeared on my screen, I let it ring. Then I answered. Nat. Her voice was different, smaller, somehow. "You good?" "I'm good. You?" She breathed. "I needed to talk to you. We're having a hard time. Marcus has been out of work since March. We're behind on the mortgage. Credit cards are piling up." She stopped, started again. "I know we haven't really talked this year, but you've always been good with money, always organized, and I thought." I waited. "Could you lend me $2,000? I stayed quiet for about 5 seconds, not to torture her, to let the question fully land before I responded. "Keisha," I said carefully, "do you remember the dinner at Dr. Whitfield's? What Mama said about me?" Silence on the other end. That I was never going to finish a degree, that I was going to spend my life mopping floors. I said it without anger. It was just the description of a fact. You nodded. You didn't say anything to the contrary. Nat, I didn't know what to say in that moment. You knew I was in medical school. You knew what Mama was saying wasn't true, and you stayed quiet. I was uncomfortable, and I was humiliated. I breathed slowly. "I'm not bringing this up to attack you. I'm bringing it up because it has to be named before we can keep talking. What happened that night happened, and I carried it while I finished school alone, with no support from either of you. Nat, I am so sorry about that. I really am. I believe you. I paused, and because I do, lending money right now, before we've had a real honest conversation about what happened between us, isn't something I can do. So you're not going to help. I'm going to help a different way. There are HUD-approved housing counselors in Fulton County who help with mortgage workouts. I can pull that information for you today. That I'll do. You're being cold about this. I took a second before answering. I'm being honest. Those are different things. She hung up without saying goodbye. My mother called 2 days later, with contained anger. That anger of someone defending someone else, but also defending a version of the story they need to be true. You left your sister hanging. I didn't. I gave her a concrete referral. You have money and you didn't help. I have money because I built it with work, I said. And when I needed support, Mama, what I heard was that I was never going to finish a degree, that I was going to spend my life mopping floors, in front of 15 people, with you laughing. Her silence was different this time, not the silence before words that cut, something heavier and stiller. I'm not going to let my sister go without the basics, I continued. If it comes to that, we'll talk, but lending money before we have an honest conversation about what happened isn't something I can do right now. The call ended without resolution. These things rarely resolve in one phone call. The event at Atlanta Medical was a Saturday evening, a mixer between the community health programs and the hospital's clinical departments, the kind of event that brings together faculty, residents, staff, and community partners. Dr. Calloway Whitfield had personally invited me. I confirmed. What I didn't know was that Aunt Gloria had been invited by her husband, who had a connection to one of the event's sponsors, a pharmaceutical company, and that she had brought my mother. I found that out when I arrived at the entrance hallway and saw her standing near the check-in table, Aunt Gloria beside her, both of them with that posture of someone not quite familiar with the environment but not wanting to show it. She saw me. I saw her. I was in my white coat, resident ID badge, my name, my DEA number in progress, my department, pediatrics, Atlanta Medical Center. She looked at the coat, looked at the badge, looked at me. Natalie, she said my name with a voice I didn't recognize right away, not the voice of authority I'd grown up hearing, something more stripped back. You're here as, she gestured vaguely at the coat, like the words weren't coming, as a pediatrics resident, Mama. Yes. Aunt Gloria opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. A medical resident? Pediatrics. She looked at me, looked at the badge, looked at my mother, and the expression on her face was one of the most complicated things I've ever seen on a human face. Confusion, embarrassment, the tab for everything she had said about me being presented all at once, with my name printed on a hospital ID badge. My mother didn't say anything. She stood looking at the badge with an expression I didn't know how to name. Not joy, not shame. Something older and harder than either. Before either of them could say another word, I heard my name from the side hallway. It was Dr. James Okafor, head of the pediatrics department, who I'd been working with the past few weeks on a complex case. A 4-year-old girl with suspected congenital heart disease and a deteriorating respiratory picture. Dr. Brooks. The word doctor came out with the naturalness of someone who says it every day without thinking. We need you right now. The girl in Bay 6 just crashed. I was already turning before I finished processing. On my way, I said, and I went. I walked past my mother in my white coat, with my badge, with the steps of someone who knows exactly where they're going. I went through the hallway she had never walked through, because that hallway had always been on the other side of a door she'd told me wasn't mine. That night I was part of the team that stabilized a 4-year-old girl who had arrived in respiratory collapse. The girl stabilized. She spent 48 hours in the PICU and then transferred to the floor with a favorable prognosis. When I walked out of the hallway at 11 p.m., exhausted, hungry, with that specific kind of happiness that only people who do this work understand, Dr. Calloway Whitfield was waiting with a cup of coffee. Your mother was here, she said. I know. She came to find me while you were inside. I stopped, looked at her. She wanted to know if it was real, if you were really a resident, if that was really your name on the badge. What did you say? Dr. Calloway Whitfield took a sip of her own coffee. I told her yes, and I told her I had walked past that back hallway 3 times while you were cleaning and studying anatomy at 2 in the morning, that I'd carried that image around for months without being able to put it together, and that when it came together, I understood I'd been on the wrong side at that dinner, not for staying quiet, but for not finding you sooner. She looked at me. Your mother didn't say anything for a long time after that. My mother was waiting on a bench outside the building when I came out. Alone. Aunt Gloria had already left. She was sitting with her purse in her lap, hands folded over it, looking out at the parking deck with that posture of someone waiting and not quite sure for what. I sat down beside her. For a moment neither of us said anything. The Atlanta night was warm in the way June nights are there, thick and still, smelling like cut grass and distant rain. The hospital kept moving at its own pace around us, indifferent to the most difficult conversation my mother and I had ever had. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said finally. The voice was broken in a way I hadn't heard before. Not anger, something else entirely. "I did tell you, Mama. When I got my acceptance, I told you. When I started working at the medical center, I told you. You kept saying it wasn't going to work out." She opened her mouth, closed it. "You were in medical school." She said it more to herself than to me, like she was testing the sentence to see if it fit the reality. "I was. And now I'm in residency. I didn't know you were studying while you were working here." "You knew, Mama." I said it carefully, without anger, just with the need to not let that one pass. "You found my white coat in the laundry. You saw my Morehouse ID in the kitchen drawer. I told you when I got in." She looked at the ground. "You chose not to know," I went on, "because knowing made it harder to believe I was going to fail. And believing I was going to fail was easier than believing I was going to make it, because then you'd have to ask yourself why you didn't believe in me from the start." Her hands tightened on her purse. "I was scared," she said at last. "I know. I didn't want you to be hurt if it didn't work out." "Mama." I looked at her. That face I knew better than any other face in the world. The lines around her eyes, the calloused hands that had cleaned other people's houses for decades, the hair that was grayer than I'd been paying attention to. "What you did at that dinner, at Dr. Whitfield's house, that hurt, in a way I can't put into words. It wasn't the fear you had, it was how it came out. Erasing what I'd built in front of 15 people with a laugh like I didn't exist." She kept looking at the ground. "You can be scared for me, that's one thing. But erasing me is another, and I can't pretend that didn't happen." A car moved through the parking deck above us. Headlights swept across the concrete, went dark. "I don't know how to apologize for that," she said at last. "I know you don't, and that's okay for tonight. We're not going to solve this in one conversation, but you'll give me the chance?" I looked at her for a long moment. "Yes, but the conversation has to go the way it needs to go, without you rewriting what happened. Without, I always believed in you deep down. Without, I just wanted to protect you. What happened, happened. I need you to know that." She nodded, slowly, with the seriousness of someone agreeing to something that costs them. We sat on that bench for about 20 minutes, not talking much, looking at the parking deck. It was the most honest conversation my mother and I had had in years, and most of it happened in silence. The process between us was slow after that night. It wasn't a reconciliation with a hug and music. It was a series of short calls, some visits, the gradual decision not to use the history as a weapon in every exchange. My mother didn't transform overnight, but she stopped saying certain things, and sometimes that's where everything begins. Keisha, months later, got a part-time job at a pharmacy, and Marcus found work at a smaller company. They worked out a mortgage modification. I didn't lend the money, but I helped her find the HUD counselor's number, like I'd promised. Aunt Gloria never mentioned the dinner again. Some truths get too heavy to carry once the world has confirmed the opposite of what you said. Today I wake up at 6:30 in an apartment in East Atlanta. 2 bedrooms, a back deck, my name on the mortgage. I made the down payment with my signing bonus and a savings account I'd built over 2 years. The mortgage isn't paid off. It's going to take a while, but it's mine. I have a coffee maker I bought at a thrift store on Moreland Avenue for $8 that I use every morning. Before I leave, I look at the apartment for a second. Not every day, but sometimes. It's a way of remembering that it's real, that it exists, that it belongs to me the same way the work I did to get here belongs to me. I have a photo in the office at my residency program. It's me in the sea green uniform, caught by the security system camera during an overnight shift. I found it by accident, asked for a copy, printed it 4x6 and put it in a simple frame. It's right there. When I'm tired, and residency tires you, there's no way around it. I look at that photo and remember where I came from and how much I held on to be here. The tire doesn't go away, but it gets more bearable. I get to the hospital at 8. I see kids. Sometimes they're kids from neighborhoods like the one I grew up in, children of women who work as housekeepers and cooks, who come in with that exhausted look of someone who hasn't slept right, who thank you with an intensity that presses against your chest. And I know exactly where they come from, not theoretically, with my body. I know that exhaustion. I know that gratitude. Dr. Calloway Whitfield and I built a community health program together that serves children 0 to 12 from underserved communities across Southwest and Southeast Atlanta, including Mechanicsville, where I grew up. Once a month, I go out there. The first time I walked into that neighborhood in a white coat with my hospital badge and a bag of supplies, I had to stop outside for a second before going in. Just a second. Then I went in. Cheryl, my co-worker from the night shift, is a licensed practical nurse now. She did the program while she was still working. I run into her in the hallways sometimes. We get coffee when we can. Every conversation with her lives in that back hallway at 2 in the morning, the mop, the anatomy book, the yellow fluorescent light. That hallway is part of me the same way the white coat is. Dr. Whitfield stopped me in the hospital corridor one morning and said that Patricia had told him the whole story. He looked at me for a moment, said, "I should have asked that night at dinner what you were doing. I'm sorry I didn't. I thought about the answer for a second, then said, "You didn't need to know. I knew. As for my mother, she still cleans houses. I can't change her past, and she doesn't want me trying to change her present. But when she gets sick now, she calls me. And when I answer, she sometimes calls me doctor without realizing it. And sometimes I hear that, and I need to breathe before I respond." It wasn't a clean reconciliation. It was real life. Complicated, slow, with edges that still hurt when you brush against them at the wrong moment. But I don't have anger anymore. I have clarity, and clarity is more useful than anger over time. If you're hearing this, and you're somewhere like where I was, working overnight to pay for a program your family thinks isn't going to work out, studying quietly because someone in your life is afraid of who you're becoming, I want you to know that fear is not about you. It never was. It's about them, and about the life they built inside the limits they believed existed. You are not obligated to carry those limits, and there's something I want you to hold on to. Whatever your situation is right now, domestic work, whether it's what my mother did for 30 years, or what I did during medical school, is not defeat. It never was. It is sustenance. It is practical dignity. And the person who does that work deserves real respect, not the kind of respect that gets performed while the service is being used. But if you do that work and you have rights, and you do, you need to know what they are. Too many women lose protections they never knew they had. If you're a domestic worker, you have federal protections under the Fair Labor Standards Act, including minimum wage and overtime pay if you work more than 40 hours in a week. Many states have additional protections, including California, New York, Illinois, and Massachusetts, under domestic workers' bills of rights that cover things like rest breaks, advance notice of termination, and protection from harassment. Your employer cannot legally retaliate against you for asking about your rights or filing a complaint. If you're working without a formal agreement or being paid off the books, you may still have legal protections: pay stubs, text messages, Venmo or Zelle payment records, a co-worker who can confirm the arrangement. These things can establish an employment relationship even without a written contract. Workplace harassment and emotional abuse on the job have names and legal remedies. Being humiliated in front of others, being called demeaning names, having your pay withheld as a form of control, being denied access to basic facilities, that is not how this household works. That is abuse. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, state labor departments, and legal aid organizations in most major cities can help you understand your options. And a lot of that help is free. If you don't know where to start, searching Domestic Workers Alliance or Worker Center with your city name will usually open a door. You are not alone in this, and you don't have to figure it out without support. I say all of this because if I had known from the beginning that the work I was doing had legal protection, that I had rights even when I was wearing a sea green uniform and pushing a housekeeping cart, I would have acted differently in a lot of moments. You learn, and you learn so you can pass it on. And there is one specific thing I want you to hear, whether you're a domestic worker or someone who loves one. No employer, no matter how big the house, no matter how much they pay, no matter how much they claim to take care of you, has the right to make you feel like less than a complete human being. Being pleasant day to day and failing to respect your labor rights do not cancel each other out. Both can happen at the same time. And when they do, the pleasantness doesn't erase the violation. Documentation is power. Save your payment records. Keep work-related texts. Write down your hours. These things feel small in the day-to-day and become enormous when you need to prove what you lived. Thank you for staying here with me until the end of this story. If this video found you, share it with someone who's trying to finish a degree in difficult circumstances and is being told they're not going to make it. This story is for that person. Because sometimes we need to hear it's possible not from someone who never doubted, but from someone who was told it was impossible and went anyway. Subscribe to the channel. The next story is almost ready. And tell me in the comments, what would you do, or what have you already done, with the life someone said was impossible for you? You are more than the ceiling someone tried to put over you. She'll never finish a degree. The laugh died in her throat. And I will never forget that second.